And all right, so this is my presentation on Hannah More. So, Hannah's early life. Hannah More was born in 1745 in Fishponds, Bristol, United Kingdom. She was four of five girls born from Mary and Jacob More. Little is known about her mother Mary, but Jacob, her father, took his daughter's education very seriously and taught Hannah the quote-unquote boy subjects of math and Latin. The story goes that Jacob became so intimidated at her abilities in these subjects that he actually stopped teaching her and sent her to a tutor at Bristol Baptist Academy, where for 18 months her teachers supposedly reported that she was the best student he's ever had. And so Mary, the eldest sister, was sent off to a French school in Bristol, and upon her return, she was expected to begin to teach her sisters. So in 1758, Mary, who was 19 at the time, ended up opening a girls' boarding school in Bristol, and Hannah was 12, and so she started off as a pupil there before transitioning into a teaching role herself. And so she began to write dramas for her students to perform, and these gained general acclaim around Bristol and were even published. So during her time teaching there, through his cousins, William Turner came in contact with Hannah and William Turner of Belmont Estate, and so they ended up getting engaged, and they were engaged for 6 years. And after 3 postponed marriages during this time, Hannah finally called off the marriage. She was 28, but lucky for her, she would receive an annuity from Turner of £200 per year, which gave her financial freedom to pursue her dreams of playwriting. So by 1773, she found herself in London and became famous initially as a poet, playwright, and socialite. Some of her most notable plays were The Inflexible Captive, which was staged in 1774, and it was followed by Percy, a Tragedy in 1777, and then A Fatal Falsehood in 79. She was close friends with many celebrities of her day, the most notable being David Garrick, as well as his wife Eva. And David was one of the most famous Shakespearean actors at the time, and was the manager of London's Theatre Royal, and he helped to stage 2 of her plays and sort of like welcomed her into the inner circle. She was drawn to the women's social movement known as the Blue Stockings and became a member, but as Hannah's evangelical faith grew, she became increasingly dissatisfied with her lifestyle and the lifestyle of the elites that she was associating with in London. And so she also became put off from playwriting, and this is most likely due to her being accused of plagiarism as well as the death of David Garrick. And so in 1785, she abandoned the London life. And by 87, she came into contact and actually became close friends with William Wilberforce, and he was among the leaders of the movement to abolish the slave trade, and Hannah ended up finding herself in an abolitionist role as well. So she was influenced by the poet William Cowper's poem The Negro's Complaint, and this resulted in her writing a poem of her own called Slavery, which was published in 1788. And it viewed slaves in the light of being actual human beings created in the image of God. And it highly contributed to the newly operating abolition society. Now, the abolition of slavery would not occur until 1833, which, funny enough, is actually the date that William and Hannah both died. So, and they found out about it weeks before both departing. So that was pretty cool. So going into her later work, in 1789, her friend William Wilberforce actually came to stay with Hannah and her sisters, who had all moved to Cheddar, which was a village in the UK. And he saw how poor the living conditions were there and proposed to Hannah to open Sunday schools that he would help finance. And now Sunday schools aren't what we think of now. They were for working class children who only had Sunday off, and that was their only chance to actually be educated. And so she devoted the next 20-ish years of her life to this pursuit, setting up schools all throughout Somerset, England. And the three most successful ones would be in Cheddar, which was the first one that was established, as well as in Shipham and Nylia, excuse my pronunciation on that, but those three were known as the quote-unquote great schools, as they would continue to thrive beyond uh, Hannah's involvement. And so the curriculum was mainly reading, not a lot of writing took place. That was one of the critiques, and most of the reading came from the Bible, as well as learning basic life skills. But one of the church attendance actually dramatically increased as a result of this biblical teachings for the lower class. And so, like I said, there's some criticism from landowners and clergy who saw Hannah as a threat to their status, but despite the pushback, she continued to encourage the poor of society. And Hannah published many writings throughout her life, one of which was in 1799 called Structures on the Modern System of Female Education, which argued girls should have an education that would help them develop intellectually and their morals in order to enable them the ability to find their place in the world. Schools weren't Moore's only source of aid for the lower class of society. She also focused much of her writings toward them as well, and she did this by taking complex ideas and making them more digestible. So this can be most famously noted in her Sheep Repository Tracts, which from 1795 to 1798 would produce 114 tracts, sell around 2 million copies per year, and found their way to Italy, West India, and America as well. She also started the Women's Friendship Society, which provided funding for sick and maternity leave, as well as training for women for higher paying work. In 1801, moving into her final years, Hannah supposedly retired, that's again in quotes, as she moved to the city of Bath with her sisters. In 1808, she wrote a novel called Colebs in Search of a Wife, and it was sort of an instructional book with little characterization, and the intention seemed to offer the middle class a guide to appropriate female behavior and present evangelicalism as the religion of the home. Her final writing project would be a series of devotional books about the nature and practice of the Christian faith, and the first of these would be Practical Piety, and it was actually published in 1853, so that would be after her death. And so going back 1819, this date would mark the death of her last sister. But Hannah would not spend much time alone, as according to her, she would receive up to 20 visitors a day, and they would just come to see her. But sadly, 1833 is the date she finally died at the age of 88. So she did pretty well for a woman of her time. And upon her death, she left £30,000, which was distributed across 70 clubs, schools, charities, and religious activities. Her name lives on in Somerset through names of schools and streets. And it's important to note that Hannah was extremely popular during her time and was regarded as the most widely read female author. She seemed to have made the evangelical thought fashionable to the upper class, but her legacy did not live on, as she is mentioned very little nowadays, which is sort of a mystery. And upon researching Hannah more, I came across so many endeavors, writings, and connections to other famous people of her day that it was hard to discern between what was most relevant. And in the end, I'm left in awe at this woman's extraordinary long life and all her achievements and quests, but I still am left with the question of what went wrong in the continuation of her legacy. And I suppose this is still a mystery and hopefully can be answered in the ages to come. But this is my bibliography and my sources. Thank you so much for listening, and I apologize for any of technical difficulties or pauses, but thank you once more.